All right, so we should be live here.
Okay.
Oh yeah, and I get my regular message that this platform we're using is dying. Not unusual there. Yeah, there we go. Welcome to, what episode is this? Episode 4 of Following Mechanical Turks. We're joined this time with a guest, Dr. Casey Boyle, who's at UT Austin. Folks probably know Casey from some of his work, either the recent book, right, Rhetoric as a Post-Human Practice. Also, I understand you're the director there of the Digital Writing and Research Lab at UT Austin. So, Casey, thanks, of course, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And is today your birthday?
It is, yeah.
Well, happy birthday.
Yeah, we didn't get you anything.
Yeah.
We perhaps stimulating scholarly conversation is a
yes.
To be determined.
For which there's a gift receipt.
We don't want to take too much of your time. As you know, we're working on this project with Amazon's Mechanical Turk, the crowdsourced job platform. I guess that's the best sort of thumbnail description.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're doing is, in particular, taking a look at the text of the posts, those job posts, to try and make, or just try and, I guess, describe or, language you're using is follow or trace, what that language imputes about the purview of the human.
Okay.
So I was going to let Nathaniel sort of take point because, in particular, we're thinking of sort of theoretical frameworks that might help us, explain or understand some of the things we're seeing. Nathaniel, did you want to say more about that?
Yeah. So part of why we wanted to have you on, obviously, is as we indicated and as we have up on our site as a sort of brief description of our approach to this is sort of a combination of cultural techniques and actor network theory, as sort of Jeremy's already suggested, right? That essentially not using an already formulated notion of the human to make sense of what Mechanical Turks is doing, which is oftentimes kind of a lot of at least what we're seeing now is, having some normative understanding of the human and then using that to assess or describe or otherwise critique Mechanical Turks. And you introduced me to the sort of the notion of cultural techniques, the Siegert work and a couple of other things. And we think it works really well for this in terms of the ways in which we kind of want to see how the cultural technique of the Mechanical Turk generates the concept of the human. Kind of another way of describing what Jeremy just described. And so that's kind of what we brought you on, is just to kind of think with you about cultural techniques. And so we're kind of starting by asking you what your, like when we say Mechanical Turk, we say M-Turk, kind of what your impression of that is, sort of where you're at in terms of that. I mean, I know that you're currently working on your next project on citizenship and media and mediation. And I know that a big part of that is looking at smart cities. Mm-hmm. And there's a kind of resonance between smart cities and Mechanical Turks, both in the sense of which they're trying to kind of create and leverage big data all at the same time, and sort of what consequences we think there'll be of that. So I guess that's kind of an opening. Like, what do you, given your own background, what's your general sense of the M-Turks project?
In terms of like you all's project, or like the general,
the general, right? When you hear Mechanical Turks, Rorschach it.
Oh gosh. Obviously, I mean, I always go to Amazon, of course. That's the one that's like most prevalent in the things I come across and the things I read. And the idea of like crowdsourcing, outsourcing, decentralizing any sort of labor. But also in a weird way, decentralizing and undermining expertise located in any one place, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, I don't know, which is both a problem, but also a possibility, I suppose. Particularly with Amazon, I mean, and this is why I think cultural techniques comes into play really well, is that the idea of the mechanical Turk, the idea of crowdsourcing, idea of the allowing the human to come in and perform specific tasks, but trying to outsource as many as possible to automated processes, hits at and kind of highlights a kind of cultural technique that's emerging, perhaps not even emerging, but just like raging at the moment, right? I think of, so that's kind of where I go with that, kind of amorphous, I'm sure, but I think the Mechanical Turk project is itself a amorphous thing anyways.
Yeah. Jeremy, any chime-ins?
Well, I guess in part we were sort of thinking in terms of our approach to this, because one thing we are going to do methodologically is collect the actual content of the posts itself. And so we're kind of thinking of, as a theoretical framework, what might something like cultural techniques let us do maybe?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I like about cultural techniques is, at least some of the readings I have of it, there's, lots of different flavors and variants of the term and the concept. And a lot of this was the Siegert work, but also like work by like Cornelia Visman would be a really good one for you all to take a look at, where she talks about cultural techniques in and as a kind of grammar. Not necessarily, and they side a little bit too much with the signification side of things, but the idea of what grammar does, it divides and renders into processes certain blocks of information, right? Or practices, subjects, objects, verbs, that sort of thing, right? And so in terms of cultural techniques, one of the things that draws me to it is it pays attention to the signifying aspects of cultural practices, but what it tries to do, and this is where it comes through with the German media theory, is it also attends to, perhaps not explicitly, but it tends to the asignifying aspects of media practice as well. Sometimes, many times, at the disappointment of a lot of people who are interested more in the political, as we think of it with most cultural studies kinds of projects, right? Mm-hmm. But the idea of the asignifying aspects of media practice and production are really important. The sort of the line that gets trotted out the most in cultural techniques in terms of setting it up and explaining it is how it initially refers to agricultural work, right? Either large scale agricultural work or literally just drawing a literal line in the soil to claim it, to own it, which creates a subject that then masters that ground, but also to cultivate it. If we're going to slide over into the Latin roots, cultivate it and use it as some sort of expression, right? That sort of relationship, that grammatical or grammaticized relationship between all of those things gets transported over into media in the way that we have to become knowledgeable about how we control and operate media devices, TVs, radios, whatever. But even further into how the media then come back and reshape what gets controlled, how it gets controlled, and that sort of thing. And I'm thinking of control here less as like some sort of top-down power thing than an act of like determining possibilities and stuff. So
right. Yeah, I mean that's kind of our interest is how these human intelligence tasks or hits, how they're actually getting articulated in both, I think, as you point out, the kind of signifying them and how are they literally described. But we're also interested in what kinds of things count as human intelligence tasks. So, right. So one of our possible, as we're floating all these.
Yeah. Give me some examples of that.
One of our possible sort of experiments is we actually want to generate a bunch of these human intelligence tasks, right? Parse this language, something like that, and seeing which of them get taken up or not.
Yeah.
Right? So what actually, in terms of, right, where are the limits in terms of if we want to sort of understand what constitutes a human intelligence task, is there a way we can sort of, using almost something like, sonar, sort of map the edges of that by seeing what gets taken up as a human intelligence task and sort of what gets bounced back. I mean, as far as examples, I was actually just talking to my colleague Martin Dirksen, who I've written with. He's in social psychology, and looking at the ways in which social science research and social psychology research use human intelligence tasks to complete surveys and things like that. And that's a kind of interesting approach, and particularly given that there's now, people who are mechanical Turk workers creating bots that then complete the human intelligence tasks. Right? I mean, it's this weird kind of phenomenon. And as Jeremy and I have discussed too, that it's partially why whatever the implications of Amazon, the fact that they chose to call it the Mechanical Turk is sort of endlessly fascinating to me. The idea of the original Mechanical Turk is this sort of illusion that's not completely automated, but is also machinic, but it's also a cabinet in which the difference between human and non-human agency is constantly being hidden and shifted, so you can't ever quite tell where the line is.
Yeah, that's the amorphous stuff, right? I mean, the thing I'm wondering is, like, when you first started talking about the project and here in this video, you say that we too often presume, if I'm remembering right, we too often presume the human, at which we then just like determine what's the non-human after that, right? And what you're doing is trying to do the other way. And I'm wondering if you're too readily identifying with the non-human first.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So I'm wondering if you're just doing the same thing overwise. So you have the Mechanical Turk and the human intelligence task, but what about even going to a site like Fiverr, where people are asking each other for favors for $5 or whatever. Like, why not start there as well, and see what else humans are, like, I don't know, say lacking, but reaching out for or whatever, right? Like, I like the idea of the Turk going back and forth, but I wonder if you can expand it even more, just to make it even more amorphous.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point, and there are lots of services like that. One that springs to mind is Be My Eyes.
Yeah, that's a good one. I know that one well. Yeah.
Yeah, and now that one, because the economy that one runs on, I don't think it has. I mean, it's not for pay, and I'm not sure. I'd have to check if it has any sort, if it's tokenized in any way, right? I mean, do you get karma?
It's not. If you all don't know, if anybody else watching this doesn't know what Be My Eyes is, it's an app where people with any sort of vision impairments can just say, hey, I need help reading this sign or this, what is this object, and they can use their smartphone, and someone on the app can identify the object or read the thing for them. So, but I don't think I think it's all charity. It's all just out of trying to help people. So I think that's where, if you already start with like Amazon Mechanical Turk, but you start looking at these other kinds of sharing activities, right? I think that it would be really productive and I don't know, fun. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think it would be productive to look at these other kinds of things.
Right.
And that's what cultural techniques would be, right? Like, that's the technique itself is what enables these kinds of sharing of knowledges and expertises to happen, right?
Right.
And so it's not just looking at Amazon and thinking of it as like the cultural technique, but the cultural technique is what creates this condition in which all these kinds of sites work.
Right.
One of my favorite examples of cultural techniques that kind of help me think about it is that little blithe saying of like Uber, but for blank, right?
Right.
Uber, but for this, right? So what we've done is identified this example, and within that example, we've kind of condensed a whole host of things like database technologies, GPS technologies, smartphone devices, digital financial transactions, poor labor markets that's going to allow someone to do something for really cheap.
Right.
It's like Uber, all those fucking things, but for, I don't know, cleaning my socks or whatever.
Right.
Like, I want to take this grammaticized unit of conglomerate labor economy, right? And I want to make it also do this other thing that I want to do too.
So
go ahead.
Just to clarify, I mean, I think what you're sort of suggesting to us is treating the Amazon Mechanical Turk service as
symptomatic of greater.
Yes, that not seeing it as the cultural technique, but seeing it as the fruits of a particular cultural technique that's also operating.
Yes.
Elsewhere.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so thinking pragmatically about the work, would then we, I mean, I'm wondering, and maybe this is putting the cart too far ahead of the horse. Oh, there's no real problem with that. Would we potentially use this as the context, right? Identifying and discussing these other things and then drilling down deeper into Mechanical Turk in order to investigate that. Or I wonder if it works the other direction. Well, see, I'm wondering if that works the other direction. Looking at Mechanical Turk suggests something about this plexus, right? Is it moving from the examination of Turk to, is it inductive or deductive, I guess, in a way? Is it moving from
transductive? Right? It's transductive. It's so I mean, one of the things I like about cultural techniques and things like in Catherine Hale's book, How We Think, and the idea of technogenesis, which she gets from inflected by Simone Doan and a bunch of other people, is that like we've spent the last 20 or 30 years, and this is what Ant has done really well with. This is what like Donna Haraway's done amazing with, but talking about Latour too, I guess, talking about how knowledge is situated and it's concrete and it's in these like specific practices and stuff. And that's true. I'm not going to undermine that whatsoever. But knowledges also are leaky, and they infect other areas, and I think we can do better job, especially thinking of the conditions of the Anthropocene and global climate crisis and all this stuff. We have to think a better job of going from local to global in a way that traces these transductions between Mechanical Turk and Uber, or Mechanical Turk and Fiverr, or whomever else, right? And so the technique we have to come up with new techniques for this, where it's neither global nor local, but some sort of articulation of how these practices help structure other practices in other places.
Yeah. No, and it sort of gets at one of my other questions too, if and keep continuing to pick your brain, is sort of thinking about, taking up cultural techniques and thinking about its sort of time frame. So a lot of the stuff that's out there on cultural techniques is sort of very empirical and historical. So it's sort of, it's got links to media archaeology and things like that. And
right.
Particularly, at least the Sigurd I've read, seems to view it more that way, right? It's a kind of historical look.
Yeah.
And there is other, I was just rereading the Velkin piece on swarms. And so I guess sort of picking your brain a little bit about cultural techniques as a kind of historical viewpoint, but also the work then of tracing cultural techniques as they're emerging in that moment. And I'm wondering if sort of building off of your discussion of transduction, if there's, any insight, or is my reading even an accurate assessment of various flavors of cultural techniques?
I think so, but I also think that's just, that's kind of true of most academic research projects, right?
Right.
I've said this a lot, but like academics, we're really attuned to, and we're kind of struggling with this right now, honestly. We're really attuned to being able to go and research and document and create narratives and timelines and that sort of thing. But in the last 10 years or so, with a move towards more pronounced practices of being like scholar activists, or on the slightly other side, but related, the notion of like speculation, right? And using academic work as a way to speculate on what might come next.
Right.
These are all things that are tenuous, and we're still trying to figure our ways out through those. So it's not just cultural techniques that are interested in history and do most of their analyses in history. That's just the data that's available, right? That's the material that's available. But how do you turn that into something else? How do you turn that into a sensibility for what's happening now, and create like, some sort of like notion or sense of responsibility for what to do about those things? I think that's what we're all trying to figure out and do.
Yeah. No, but I think even that, your formulation of doing that historical work, and I think in particular, how does that historical work become a kind of sensibility? I mean, I don't, not to speak for Jeremy, and in part, I think that this project and the way that we're even doing this project is, I think, an effort to do that. Right? Is there a way that we could perform this scholarly project in a way that's, and in fact, maybe one of the ways, because we're still struggling, by the way, with what to call this thing we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Right? Is this a consultation? Are you being brought in as a reviewer or a co-author? Right? What I'm wondering too is one of the ways of describing is bringing on that. In fact, I think one of the ways I could describe is a lot of what you've given us already has probably helped Jeremy and I develop a set of sensibilities that we perhaps didn't have prior to the conversation, right?
Yeah.
There's now things that we're going to be on the lookout for, and on the lookout for them in particular ways. So, but yeah, I mean, in many ways, it's a reminder that that's, you're just saying, that's the work you guys have to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, going back to I want to make one more note about the historical aspect of that thing. So, I mean, but that's doing the history, and historiography is political too, and a lot of times that has everything to do with the present, right? I mean, this is like Nietzschean notion of genealogy and how Foucault mobilizes it, and later Butler, right?
Right.
And we see this kind of historical but present work in feminist archiving methodologies. We see it in a lot of quote unquote recovery projects, right? Like this is a way of doing history to impact the present and restructure the present, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, in part because we're, not yet sure what the, I suppose what the thesis is, right? I mean, what's the ultimate point to this? And I think we're both ultimately hedging at having sort of a tidy notion of, so this is what Mechanical Turks is, or this is what we should be doing to resist or further it, or those kinds of let's put a bow on this. I think we're hedging at that, but it then leaves you with, then what are you doing?
Right. Well, I didn't even know this was going to be an actual live stream interview. Hey, will you talk to me and Jeremy about cultural techniques? And I thought we were just going to have a chat online or something.
Yeah.
And then I told her something, and he was like, "Okay, here we go. Here's the link."
I sent out the press release prior to sending out the press release.
That's right.
This wasn't. Listen, listeners. I'm assuming hundreds of you.
Yeah.
He didn't know it was a live stream. He said yes. He did know it was a live stream before this live stream started. So this is not it's the webcam is on, Casey. This is an academic version of Candid Camera.
Yep.
Nothing's private anyway.
Yeah. No, I don't. Yeah.
The webcam's always on.
Sorry for all of you.
That's fine.
Yeah, so, I mean, in terms of other talking points that we wanted to hit, I mean, I think we've got a general summary. I mean, do we have a general summary of what cultural techniques is?
I mean, there's lots of them out there. We do have them. Maybe not in this video, but we
hit us with your favorite.
I don't know. What I like is cultural techniques is and as the sort of sets of practices by which humans and non-human technologies or media co-constitute one another.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's good. Yeah, I've got this is from the Winthrop Young, the introduction to I forget what journal had the special issue. The special issue on cultural techniques.
I'm not
Theory,
sure.
Culture, and Society.
Of course, yeah.
Were you going to extend that, or?
Yeah, you just...
I meant Nathaniel.
Oh yeah. No, I'm sorry, I cut out there for a second. No, anyway, I like this. So he writes, cultural techniques refers to processing operations that frequently coalesce into entities, which are subsequently viewed as the agents or sources running those operations.
Yeah.
So, and in part, that's why our to go back to kind of where we started with, our interest in this is to, again, not that, right, we'll want to go back to the human intelligence task and use the human as the sort of entity that creates that task. And we're also interested in how the task itself creates the entity of the human that would then subsequently be used to explain that intelligent task.
Right. This is what I mean. That's more or less the sort of take on Simone Doe I do in my book, and thinking about rhetoric as a practice, anyways. Right, is the emergence of subjects and objects happen after, like after the interaction of these things, right?
Yeah.
And so in some ways, there, that definition can be like easily transduced over into, or not transduced, but like translated over into Simone Doe's notion of like the pre-individual and how things individuate and become, things in and of itself. But any one of those things that emerge, right, they still harbor with them like this kind of pre-individual like fund, right, that can be articulated and spun out anew. So
no, that's why I think the phrase I really like with respect to this human intelligence task or mechanical Turks is the phrase artificial intelligence,
which Amazon uses. That's how they describe it.
Yeah, but I think that really gets, I think, what you were just describing, Casey, that it gets at the excess of the word artificial, because it puts it back into the expression in a way that's, it's a ridiculous, there's a certain sense in which I was surprised that Amazon used it because it's such a tongue-in-cheek term, but there's also a sense in which it's a totally accurate term. It's also very serious. It's not a joke. This actually is artificial intelligence.
But I wonder to what extent that's what we're relying on anyways. All these fears of AI and all this stuff, right? Like, it's all artificial intelligence. We're all still Baudrillard, sort of like, hey, here's our real fake. It's not quite artificial intelligence yet, but it's going to be, and we're going to have lots of problems.
Yeah, or to go back to something that Jeremy and I sort of started our kind of collaborations with like the work of someone like Andy Clark, right? The notion that all intelligence is a function of artifice.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That there's a kind of a practice to that. So the idea of artificial intelligence is just an artifice within an artifice that's generating a particular kind of intelligence.
Right.
There's and in fact, in some of the contextual work we have, a lot of which are journalistic articles, they're pretty explicit statements of, pick whatever AI you'd like. It's ambiguating the work of a lot of humans, either explicitly or not, right? In some cases, things like the Theranos case, they're explicitly trying to conceal, or in the original Mechanical Turk, right? Don't show the person under the chassis, right? Or whatever. In other cases, even ones where, there is no necessarily malicious or duplicitous intent, it's still entangled with the labor of multiple levels of humans. And in fact, in thinking of the Turk itself, because I think we were kind of principally thinking about, what the hits are saying about the workers. But of course, that's going to cut a few different ways, because those who penned those hits are another human agent in that, right? The people who composed them, assumedly, are going to be principally human, even though obviously entangled with notions of artifice, either based on their experiences with these things, or just straight up, this is partially written by a bot, with a human doing touch-up, right? That's how a lot of the workers are doing this now. A bot is doing this, which is so interesting, because then those hits have to be written in ways that appeal to a lot of human and non-human audiences.
Right.
Yeah, and it never goes away. There was I read it's Tom Standage. He also has like the Victorian Internet and a couple other books. You've got a book about the Mechanical Turks. Yeah. And he points out that when Kasparov was originally playing the Deep Blue, right? Now this notion of the way to test artificial intelligence is to play chess, right? That move gets established by the Mechanical Turk. And there's at one point where Deep Blue made a move, and that was a move that Kasparov could not. He basically accused the Deep Blue of being a Mechanical Turk. He thought that it was being coached while he was playing it, because it made some move that was intuitive in a way that he thought that basically, no, there's a human in a room somewhere.
Wow, yeah,
telling Deep Blue how to play. So weirdly enough, the charge that there's a human in the machine is still a prevalent one.
right.
But it happens at these moments where the machine or the computer or whatever does something
right.
that strikes someone as somehow irreducible to a human thinker. And that, I think, also for us is a kind of interesting move, that what makes that appear as that.
Yeah, one of the going back to cultural techniques for a second, there was an article in that one special issue, and I think it was reprinted somewhere else first. Thomas Macho,
Yeah,
he talks about cultural techniques and as like humans as second order animals, right? And so the way he defines cultural techniques are those kinds of media or practices that reflect on each other. So the writing can reflect writing, the painting can paint about painting, and that all other kinds of techniques aren't quite cultural techniques in that sort of way, right? But when Jeremy was just talking about the human having to come in and just kind of do some touch up, it's almost as if like the order has to be like raised up. So second order worker now, given those kinds of new cultural techniques, are I'm just going to do the light editing now and let some other like automated process do the first part.
Right.
Now I guess we're going to be moving into a third order or something like that animal.
Right. I mean, it's the joke, like, could you have a room full of, what's the Shakespeare line? If you put a room full of monkeys in a typewriter and they could write. The problem is, like, we got a bot, they could almost get Shakespeare, and then you bring in Shakespeare to to really, basically humans now are just doing punch up. On all of these things.
Yeah. Humans as punch up machines. Yeah.
Yes, we're brought in to like give the Emmy jokes just a little more edge than they did in the writer's room.
Right.
Well, it might be interesting to see situations in which that's the case, or situations in which it's inverted, where we're cleaning up after the machine, or the machine. I mean, look at something like spell check, where the machine is cleaning up after us. I mean, or at an even higher level, right, where a bunch of humans doing human labor are being correlated by a machine in ways that, I mean, that's what in some ways the Turk is, or, a certain black box AI now, which are, well, perhaps even associated with the work you're doing with citizenship, right? Where higher order things are doing the cleanup of us. We're just doing what we are.
Yeah.
And that higher order non-humans are collating that together.
Right.
Yeah, this was, I think both of you, have made similar arguments. I know, Jeremy, early on in our work on this, right, that the notion of being machine readable is this weird sense in which the human beings are now we're the thing that's being read. And this is very resonates with, I think, Casey's, your pervasive citizenship, right? That the human beings are not doing, they're not being the citizens, they're providing the data points through which citizenship happens.
Right.
And some really interesting ways there. Yeah. So even then, right, that even you can't even slot the human is what's at the second order, because we can now think of all sorts of examples where that gets inverted, and the humans are doing that basically by our living, we create the data that's then understood by.
Yeah. Right. I was thinking of it in terms of literacy, right? I mean, we're still literate in an older sense of, print literate, but there is a different notion of literacy now, in which we're the symbols to be interpreted, right? We're what's to be read rather than the readers, in a different notion of literacy.
Right.
Anywho.
Yeah.
Well, and so I think just the last bullet point we had was, part of what we're doing is incorporating guests, and we're still trying to figure out how to interpret what those guests, are they co-authors? Are they contributors?
Right.
I'm putting together a list of credits, but it's not exactly clear how that maps to any sort of institutional credit or that kind of thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm. We're going to send you a $5 Starbucks gift card.
Hey, I'll take it.
Happy birthday.
I'll bring that and 50 cents and get a coffee there.
There you go.
But one of the things we were curious about, because one of the roadblocks we've encountered is this sort of strange, either it's a catch-22 or it's one of Donald Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns, where we're talking to people that we already know would have insight on this, but we're kind of curious about talking to people who we wouldn't we wouldn't know are there who would be able to contribute. So we were curious if you knew of some other folks we could have on as guests who might have insight, perhaps that we wouldn't anticipate, or
name names.
I don't know.
Okay, fine. It's just like M. Turk. We want you to train your replacement.
I know. That's what. Yeah.
No, thank you for completing this human intelligence task, Casey. You've made 0.5 cents.
Got nothing.
It's a good unexpected result.
Yeah.
Nathaniel, was there anything else? I mean, we've got more than enough material to work with. Is there anything else
I mean, I got exactly what I wanted out of this, which is a bunch of things I didn't know I wanted. So
sorry.
That's good. No, that was perfect.
I gave you nothing you wanted, basically.
No, I really liked the notion of, I think that we've gotten, as we're putting this project together, it was very useful to have a kind of concrete thing to latch onto. So I think using the Mechanical Turk to get going, but I really liked your point. The kind of transduction point is to not necessarily treat the cultural technique as sort of synonymous or the same thing as the Mechanical Turk, but to see it as taking part in a cultural technique. And then as we go through it, kind of as we start thinking about the project, as it becomes more fleshed out, thinking about where we want to go from there, what gets fleshed out, right? Or
there's a way you can look at like these like motorized scooters as themselves a kind of Mechanical Turks. They're doing that sort of thing. Like there's all kinds of these structures that are in place, bus routes, cars, bikes, bike lanes, all this stuff, right? But there's some kind of need for like this little tiny gap being filled, and that's what a human intelligence task is. It's just a gap being filled.
Right. It's given that like the bike sharing and the scooter sharing are right. They're the last mile of public transportation.
Right.
The Mechanical Turk it's the last mile of a human
labor.
of labor. Yeah.
Of a project, right? So but like don't look at Mechanical Turk as the difference between human like this. If you're interested in cultural techniques, it has to be larger than that, and that the Mechanical Turk has to be something that emerges from the cultural technique and not as something that issues a cultural technique.
Yeah. No, that's very helpful.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and that notion of fulfilling those tasks, and in a sense, creating those tasks through their fulfillment, right?
Yep.
You never knew you needed the Lime scooter until it was there. We didn't know we needed the labor until we made the Turk, and then we always needed it.
Yeah. Well, excellent.
Yeah, great. And thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your birthday.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're enjoying my life right now.
It's I'm glad that you're alive right now.
Thank you. Me too.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Paul, for having me on.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye.
Nathaniel, should we let's do a little sew up before we end the whole thing.
Okay.
So a lot of really helpful stuff there. I was taking notes. One of my caveats is because of the way I work, and I know the way you work, my fear is always the temptation to spin off into making something broader, right?
Yeah.
Because it seems like, well, now in order to do this justice, we may have to drill down further on some of these other things that may manifest, Fiverr or Be My Eyes, or so the question then becomes, to what degree do we have to drill down into those other things? How much bigger is this going to get? Yeah.
I mean, I think at least my instinct now, it basically, you read me right too, I think, in terms of the scope of this, is I wonder if the way and just totally spitballing, obviously, the way that we've also been thinking about actor network theory, that I wonder if there's a way of that we actually are studying cultural techniques, and so we're kind of following a cultural technique through Mechanical Turk.
Okay.
And so one of the ways that we're getting at potentially what this cultural technique might be is by looking at mechanical Turks, as opposed to using the notion of cultural techniques to assess or otherwise describe the mechanical Turk. I don't know if that makes sense, right? But maybe the language of like not symptomatic or something like that, but that perhaps the cultural technique that Amazon's mechanical Turk is a version of that technique that we're following here.
Yeah.
We're not following mechanical Turk as the cultural technique. We're following mechanical Turk to get to this cultural technique or to learn something about it.
I mean, I wonder then if, yes, then what we have is not an a priori notion of what the technique is and then seeing in it a symptom. I mean, I think I was trying to get at this in that question of deduction, induction. It's not as though we have an existing notion of here's what the technique is. And I'm still a little, because I'm not too conversant in cultural techniques, what we're talking about there then would be a collection of practices that demarcate something, that do something.
I think that, another phrase that gets used is a chain of operations. That's kind of what a cultural technique is.
Okay. So then it's not as though we're coming into, okay, well, here's what that chain is, and here's how you see it operating in Turks. It presumably would be much more in another structure. Let's look at Turks and then see what in that suggests something about a larger plexus of connections.
I think that makes sense.
Okay. And then possibly then we could look at some of those other things as Casey mentioned, and those might even be avenues for potential further research.
Yeah.
But I mean, if nothing else, it does give us relief or context to say, once we look at Turk more closely, what's going on here in terms of the human and non-human that isn't going on in something like Be My Eyes.
Right.
We're not even getting fractions of a penny. You know, the economy there, if you want to put it in terms of economy, is so interesting because it's sort of, it's a volunteer economy. I did this so that a blind person or a visually impaired person was able to finish their grocery shopping.
Right. Yeah, and that would be, I think what Jeremy was getting at with the notion of transduction.
Or Casey was getting. Casey.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Is that part of the energy of a cultural technique shows up in other places, but there's always a slight difference there, right? It takes a different form each time it transduces. So there's still a relation there, right? We could still see the Be My Eyes and Fiverr and Mechanical Turk as, different transductions of a cultural technique that takes a different form.
Yeah.
Based on other variables that are present in some forms and not others.
Yeah.
So, but right, like you said, that would give us a kind of relief, we could see them as all somewhat related, but those even minor differences could then allow us to articulate something specific about Mechanical Turks without making it the only version of this cultural technique that we think we've identified.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to think about those a little bit because, I mean, I suspect, Mechanical Turk is tapping, despite that it's giving you, pennies, that's tapping into something different or some things different than Be My Eyes, right? I mean, it's who wants to volunteer for something versus who wants to get paid for something.
Right.
There's potentially a real chasm there.
Yeah. Well, and going back to, particularly as I was talking to my psychologist friend, right, that the notion of getting on a Mechanical Turk to complete a psychological study for a very small reward that's how psychological studies have always worked, right? You give freshmen in a 600 class introduction to psychology class, 5 points of extra credit for completing a survey. I mean, that move is not coming out of nowhere, right? Why is it that someone in psychology sees Mechanical Turk as a way of getting a study done? Because it's not totally unlike how they've been getting studies done already, right? Kind of a very small reward for a more or less menial, but also still kind of human task. particularly given that a lot of psychological studies are designed in such a way to kind of reveal the bare mechanism of human consciousness, right? That a good psychological study, to a certain extent, doesn't want the person taking it to be aware of what the study is doing, right? It kind of wants an automated response to that survey, because that, from a psychological standpoint, that automated response will reveal the mechanism that the psychologist is trying to study.
Yeah. It is interesting too, because a lot of the dialogue around the consternation about bots answering these is, well, they're motivated by just getting through. I mean, if it's a survey, the goal is just to complete it as quickly as possible, right? Because the incentive structure is such that the more you do, the more, money you're going to get. It's interesting because it's like, meaningfully, how is that different than what you're doing with your Psych 101?
Yeah.
I mean, what's their motivation to give real answers rather than, look, I just want my credit, so I put C on every one of them or whatever,
Right. And given that half the questions on the survey are just filler designed to, so that you don't know what, I mean, that's a class, right? You fill out a survey that's got 20 questions on it, and only 10 of them are actually the ones that they want the answer to, but they don't want you to know that that's what they're looking for. So they ask you for a bunch of things that they're not looking for. And so there's this whole, there's a whole mechanism there that's kind of interesting. All the work that has to be done to get a human participant to behave in a fairly rote way in order to learn something about them as a human is right. You have to get a human in a study to behave mechanically, so then you can reveal their automatic responses to stimuli or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's an interesting framing of the bot. I mean, it's like if bots are answering those psych responses, you're like, oh, well, we're not getting any information. It's like, yeah, but you are. I mean, you're revealing something about human motivations in that.
Yeah, it's not a result.
Right, and it's one that's potentially applicable to human stuff one way or another. It just depends what vector, I suppose, you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, as you were pointing out when we were talking to Casey, right? It's the entanglement. So it's you could say, well, they're not really learning anything about the humans because a bot is completing the survey, but that bot was built to complete that survey by a human. So there's a weird sense in which you might actually be getting if a human has turned their own responses into a bot, it might be that bot does tell you something about the human's responses to the survey.
Even things like, boy, it'd be interesting to dip into those bots and see, like, how are they programmed? Simple, random, just a random select in a multiple choice. Do they actually incorporate some notion of machine learning to do things like avoid? Because I can imagine there's an arms race there for filtering out bots, right?
Yeah, I would assume.
Then there's the other side of that arms race is, how do I craft this thing in a human? How do I capture this, right? So that it's human enough to answer the I am not a robot, right?
Right.
It's okay. Well, simply answering C isn't going to work because it gets picked up by a bot. Doing simple randomness isn't going to work because it's cross-referencing those questions. Right. And noticing you're giving disparate responses. So how do I make this human enough to get around that curve? I mean, if it's not doing it there, certainly bots are doing those for malicious purpose. I mean, CAPTCHA exists because those bots are in the wild, right?
Yeah.
They are in the wild trying to game those systems. So it's interesting. I mean, whether or not it's happening in psych studies, it's happening.
Right.
Boy, and this is the problem, is there's so many avenues.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just want to write a paper here, you're going to eventually have to prune.
Yeah.
What are we going to be talking about in a paper?
Jeremy, I just want to write a story about a chess playing automaton. I don't know what's happening here.
Right. And more to the point, I want it to be under X number of words. So you're not in the situation we're both in right now, where we're vastly over word counts, and it's difficult to know, how do I prune this down?
Yeah. And that we're not still doing this, that we get to like episode 1000 and we're all like wizened and we still like, yeah, I guess we could start this way.
Yeah, I want this.
As we're a maritime, we're trying to figure out how to get this project off the ground.
This is a mini series, not an Unbound network.
Yeah.
Sitcom, hopefully.
So, yeah.
Well,
and
all right.
most assured of a post tenure project.
Yeah. Right. So let's, in that vein, let's think about concrete steps. I mean, I don't, this is oddly kind of slipping into a theory praxis divide, because what I'm going to be doing next week and what I've been doing this week is looking at, the actual content analysis portion of the hits. The workshop I'm going to is using R for text processing, particularly machine learning in text processing. So hopefully, and they are going to cover things like how do we, because, one of the hurdles for this, since a lot of these things are killing their APIs, how am I going to collect this data? How am I going to clean it? How am I going to clean it? And then how am I going to get something significant out of it? That's what I'm going to be looking at.
Yeah. I'm actually headed to Texas next week to the Digital Writing and Research Lab for their Digital Fields Methods Institute, which is on Sensation. So I'll be working with various machine sensing tools, I assume, to figure. I don't know how that'll actually correlate to it. So, and we do have. Are we officially lined up for our next?
Yes. Yeah, and that's something we should mention. I mean, I guess I can say it because we're penciled in and we're among friends here. Our next guest, which should be, since we do this fortnightly, not next Tuesday, but the following one. The time is a little different. I believe it's 2:00 Eastern. It's
not a good sign. The network's already changing our time slot.
It's Kathleen Fitzgerald, who just wrote Generous Thinking. She's at Michigan State. And she's going to be talking to us about this project. I'm pulling up my notes here about the things I was going to ask her about this process, because her book is about forms of open scholarly collaboration, essentially. So we're going to sort of talk to her about this project, and some of those things came up with Casey. How are we getting people to participate in this, and how do you value that institutionally, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm currently building a credits list of things like, we're possibly PIs or principal investigators. We'll have people who, joined in a video discussion. Potentially, we'll also have lists of people who contribute in other ways, making draft comments or other things of that nature.
Yeah, people recommending readings. I mean, it could be a really I'm trying to think now of like when you give to a Kickstarter, right? There's going to be different levels of people who sit down to do an hour-long chat versus someone on Twitter that recommends a couple articles to read. Right?
Because, we were looking at some jobs that may get fielded by or on or off the Turk. I was thinking of, even things like, once I have that textual data, are there ways that can be classified by the Turk, and then see how it's differently classified by what I'm doing, in R.
Right.
And then other jobs, that either the Turk or not the Turk would still be useful. Things even like having people watch these videos and write up short descriptions of them.
Oh, interesting. Right?
Yeah. In part because it is sort of grunt work, but also what are other people's notions of what to pull out of this versus, because we have like one-line descriptions, but our notions of what's valuable in this are probably very different.
Sure. Right. And that would kind of mark it, right? And that would get back to our kind of earlier discussion of an experiment, right? What does
that
look like on Turk versus what does that look like when we have field people doing it,
Yeah. How do we write that up? Does that hit get posted? These things get approved. So would there potentially be things that we would want to make into a human intelligence task that wouldn't, we would either get accepted and then no one does it, right? That the hit stays up on the list for 2 weeks and we don't get any takers.
or it requires remuneration, you know, because to ask someone to watch an hour video, even at 2 times speed, which is the norm now, I mean, that's we're talking half an hour of reading or, media comprehension.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably can't give someone a nickel for that.
No. And I mean, I know that our, particularly looking at our mugs at twice speed is, there may be
there's hazard pay.
I was going to say like a surcharge, but you went for it. Yeah. No. Yeah. Time and a half.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, so anyway, right. So our next one, and we'll be announcing this. Hopefully that should be Kathleen Fitzpatrick.
Yeah.
I think I said her name wrong. I think I said Fitzgerald because I know a Kathleen Fitzgerald, but it is Kathleen Fitzpatrick,
okay.
Who wrote a Generous Thinking. And so we're going to be talking to her about the project. She also wants to talk a little bit about our interactions with Manifold.
Okay.
The project CMS.
Yeah. All right. And for those of you who've tuned in for some or part of this, if you're interested in being involved in some way or have any feedback to offer, you can get in touch with us through the project site, which accompanied this when I tweeted this out. Yeah.
In fact, let's see here, just to share.
Oh yeah.
That. Where would that be? Here, probably. Yeah. So the project page, we have the URL there, and because it's a URL, it's easier just to get the link. But you can see now we're starting to sort of organize things into texts and resources here, like the video discussion episodes, and then other things that I'm calling supporting resources. Those things may break out as they accumulate more, but things like a Google Doc, which is useful because it has a wiki functionality that Manifold, I'm not finding it has the same kind of functionality. It has comment or annotation features in the texts it uses, but then it's a little tricky to update those texts. Seemingly they have to be re-ingested.
Oh, yeah, I think I was looking into that too.
Anyway.
Okay.
All right.
Well, that's it.
And we're at an hour, so that's a good time to stop.
And we still don't have a sign off yet, do we?
Nah. Well, we'll let the Turkers figure that off.
Okay.
What's a good sign off for that?
I don't know.
All right.
Back into the cabinet. Can we say back into the cabinet?
I think you just said it.
Yeah. Okay. And I feel bad because I said it twice and it didn't get better the second time.
All right then. I will talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
See ya.